On this episode of DBL's True Crime Chronicles, an innocent couple with a baby on the way cross paths with a cartel member out for revenge and pay the ultimate price. And later, a high school football star out with friends becomes a casualty of gang rivalry, sending his mother on a mission.
Welcome to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. I'm Sam Shocker. It's been well established that cartels from Mexico have been a dangerous and deadly presence in the United States for decades, proving that crime transcends borders. But the reality of that statement doesn't make it any less tragic when innocents fall victim to these criminal enterprises. Innocents like the soon-to-be family in this first story.
On January 6th, 2007, at about 4:30 p.m., 18-year-old Lenoshka Torres and her boyfriend, 20-year-old Luis Campos, pulled up into the driveway of a mechanic's house in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. Campos was there to pick up his car, which was having transmission problems, before returning home to celebrate Three Kings Day. Luis Campos worked as a warehouse stocker and was a talented soccer player. Lenoshka Torres had been an honor student in high school and was now 6 months pregnant. They both volunteered at the Salvation Army and were looking forward to being parents. The mechanic's son later told police he looked out the window of the home and saw the couple sitting in a red Ford Explorer. Moments later, he said a light-colored car with tinted windows parked behind the Explorer, then drove away. It's unclear whether Torres and Campos got into the car, but they were never seen again. When authorities examined their vehicle, which belonged to Campos's father, they found the couple's phones on the seats and the keys still in the ignition. Police were mystified. The pair did not have criminal records, and nothing made them obvious targets of crime. Weeks passed with no leads. Then, on February 2nd, the unclothed bodies of Luis Campos and Lenoshka Torres were found under a bridge near the interstate.
My first granddaughter, I never meet. I just meet her for the sonogram picture.
They appeared to have suffered blunt force trauma as well as other injuries. For a time, there was speculation that the murder was part of an occult ritual, after officials found a voodoo shrine some 200 yards away. But the truth was much more insidious. Within days, 2 men were arrested. 51-year-old Jorge Guzman Banda, who was already in a Dallas County jail on unrelated charges, and 20-year-old Frank Estrella, who had been arrested at his mother's home in California and was eventually extradited to Texas. A third man, Nicolas Menores, was also sought, but authorities believed he fled to Mexico. Menores was a hitman for the notorious Mexico-based Gulf Cartel. Mexico's Gulf Cartel had the distinguished reputation of also being one of the country's most violent, a reputation earned when the cartel threw itself into the drug trade in the 1980s and amplified as they expanded their influence deep into the United States. The Gulf Cartel moved massive amounts of drugs, weapons, and money across the border. And with that came an unprecedented number of kidnappings, murders, and acts of violence that earned the cartel the honor of being considered the biggest terroristic threat in the United States by a number of law enforcement agencies in the late 2000s. The same time period in which Nicolas Menores served as one of the cartel's hired killers. Luis Campos and Lenoshka Torres were abducted from outside the home of Francisco Iniguez and taken to the home of Nicolas Menores' girlfriend, where, over the course of several days, they were tortured, beaten, electrocuted, and eventually killed by Menores, Banda, and Estrella. The official cause of death for Campos, Torres, and their unborn child was blunt force trauma and homicidal violence. Factors which meant a guilty verdict for all involved could result in a death sentence. Almost immediately after his arrest, Frank Estrella reached a deal with prosecutors that would controversially make him eligible for release in 2022. Jorge Banda received a life sentence later that same year. The sentences were seen as not befitting the crime, and it quickly came to light that Dallas detectives had botched the investigation when it came to gathering evidence and soliciting confessions, sparking outrage from the families of the victims. Nicolas Monores would remain a free man until July of 2012, when, after 5 years on the run, he was captured at a West Texas border crossing. But it would be another 4 years before his fate would be decided.
Kidnapping is a powerful tool of the Gulf Cartel, which is said to be responsible for more than half of the reported incidents in all of Mexico. It's seen as such a lucrative practice that even popular public figures, such as professional soccer players, have been arrested for kidnapping for the cartel. More of this story when DBL's True Crime Chronicles returns. A pregnant teenager and her boyfriend were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Their bodies dumped on the side of the road. What many first assumed was some sort of gangland retribution turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. The killers were caught, but the story was far from over.
Luis Campos, Lenoshka Torres, and their unborn child were dead. Savagely brutalized and ultimately murdered in January of 2007 by Frank Estrella, Nicolas Monores, and Jorge Guzman Banda. And all because Monores was led to believe they robbed his home of a large amount of cash and drugs. Monores had been lied to. His victims were innocent. A soon-to-be family that were unknowingly lured into a deadly trap. While Banda and Estrella were apprehended within days of the bodies being found, Monores remained at large, a wanted man who authorities feared may have escaped to Mexico. Then, in July of 2012, Monores was arrested at a border crossing in El Paso, Texas. He finally went to trial in 2016, and due in part to the same botched investigation that allowed Banda and Estrella to escape the death penalty, he was given the same sentence as Estrella, 15 years.
Doesn't make sense in my head that they can say, oh yeah, let's make a deal with you, but you didn't do a deal with us.
Only 1 year after Monores' trial, in 2017, Frank Estrella was granted parole and released from prison.
It is not fair. It's not fair.
In 2020, as his possible parole date approached, the unbelievably lenient sentence for Monores once again captured everyone's attention.
We're joined by senior crime and justice reporter Rebecca Lopez from WFAA in Dallas, Texas. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. Detectives admit they botched parts of the investigation. I want to know exactly when went wrong, and did they ever take responsibility, because this makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, the detectives never took responsibility. The DA's office, though, obviously knew there was something wrong when they went to go look at the interrogation tapes. And my sources say, they never really said, but my sources say that there was coercion and there was also issues with how the Miranda rights were read, or not read, actually. And so what is really galling is that the main guy, the guy that was one of the most violent cartel members, he only gets 15 years. They had to plea bargain. The family didn't even realize that there was a plea bargain until they got to court, and then they realized then that he was going to get a 15-year sentence and they weren't going to get to go to trial.
You know, after you saying, I can't believe I even have to ask this question, but Nicolas is eligible for parole soon. How likely is it that he'll be released this year, and how are we even talking about this? How is this even a possibility?
He'll get out because of that plea bargain. It was 15 years. Now, here's the only thing that the family has some comfort in. He is a Mexican national, so he will most likely be extradited back to Mexico. But he is known to come back and forth across the border. He was one of the main hit guys for the Mexican drug cartel called the Gulf Cartel. And so he is going to, at one point, he will get out. There is no doubt about it. He only got a 15-year sentence, and he is done with it, and he will be released.
Ugh, God. And Rebecca, it's now been more than 10 years. So how are the victims' families still fighting for justice?
You know, here's the sad part. They will never get the justice that they deserve because of how this case was handled from the very beginning, when DPD didn't take this case seriously, the Dallas Police Department, to the very end when these confessions were messed up. The two detectives that botched this case, they're no longer with the Dallas Police Department. They retired. DPD had to go back and look at all of their cases to make sure that there weren't any other issues. And so they're still in the process actually of looking through all of those cases that they had in the past as well. But this family, they'll never really get the justice they deserved.
Wow. Well, thank you for keeping the ball rolling on this, because at least someone is keeping that legacy, and we depend on people like you. Thank you, Rebecca. To read more on this case, please visit WFAA.com. You can also learn more in a new podcast episode out now. Just search True Crime Chronicles on your favorite podcast player. Again, Rebecca, thank you so much.
While Jorge Banda continues to serve out his life sentence in a maximum security prison, as of 2021, Nicholas Menardez is no longer an inmate of the Texas criminal justice system. His whereabouts are unknown. More of DBO's True Crime Chronicles after this. Welcome back to DBO's True Crime Chronicles. Far too often, the presence of criminal organizations like cartels or gangs has resulted in the deaths of those not targeted or involved in any way. One of those whose lives was unjustly taken was 17-year-old JJ Clavo. But thanks to JJ's mother, his story doesn't end with his murder.
November 13th, 2015. Police are called to the parking lot of Grant Union High School in Sacramento, California, sometime around 3:30 in the afternoon. Minutes earlier, a vehicle with 5 teenagers was stopped at a nearby intersection when someone approached the car and started firing. The driver was hit, but a quick-thinking passenger pulled him into the back seat and then drove the car to the high school parking lot, where staff members made the call for help. All of the car's occupants were not only students at Grant High, they also played on the football team. The driver of the car, quarterback JJ Clavo, was one of the 2 people hit. He was taken to the hospital, where he later died. JJ was 17 years old.
My son was headed to play in a CIF football game.
We begin tonight with some breaking and very sad news. 2 Grant Union High School football players have been shot, and one of those players is dead.
JJ and his friends were sitting ducks at that intersection for the shooter, who ran up to the car on foot and unloaded his weapon inside. JJ was hit in the chest and neck. Malik Johnson sat in the passenger seat next to JJ. He was shot in the arm and survived.
That was my baby. That was my 17-year-old. That was my only son.
Back on November 14th, the day after the shooting, 15-year-old Kimonte Lindsay had been arrested during a traffic stop after police found a firearm inside the vehicle he was in. While Lindsay was in custody, investigators discovered that same firearm matched the bullets used in JJ's killing. After piecing together evidence and talking to possible witnesses, the Sacramento Police Department built a case and officially filed charges against the now 16-year-old Lindsay, who was still being held in jail from that initial arrest in February of 2016.
3 months is really relatively a short time in some cases. It's a long time in my world. I would have never imagined being in this place, but I never imagined having the support.
Reactions to the arrest also came from those who were like an extended family to JJ, including his high school football coach.
I'm happy for him and his family I'm sad that we won't get to share any more moments together. And that's the tough part, is the fact that reality set in a while ago. And so no matter what takes place, you know, no matter who the person is, that's another life that's destroyed.
When the arrest was announced to the public, Nicole Clavo was on hand. On that fateful day in November, the then 15-year-old Kimante Lindsay, a validated gang member according to law enforcement, had actually been targeting Malik Johnson as part of a gang-related dispute. J.J. Clavo had no gang ties and didn't know Kimante Lindsay. His cold-blooded murder was the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The heartbreaking truth behind the murder of her only son still wasn't enough to shatter the faith of Nicole Clavo. But with the arrest of Kimante Lindsay came the harsh reality that Lindsay's age at the time of the crime meant he might be tried as a juvenile. The conclusion to this story when DBL's True Crime Chronicles continues. 17-year-old J.J. Clavo was an innocent victim of gang violence. In the wake of her son's death, his mother called for a community effort to save other children from the same fate, only to learn that J.J.'s killer was only 15 years old himself when he pulled the trigger.
In February of 2016, Kimante Lindsay was arrested and charged with the murder of J.J. Clavo. But it would take until 2019 before he finally went on trial. Although by then he is 19, because of his age at the time of the crime, Lindsay is tried in juvenile court, where he is ultimately found guilty. Under California law, this means he can only be held in custody until the age of 23, meaning Lindsay will serve less than 4 years for killing J.J. Clavo. J.J.'s mother spoke out shortly after the sentencing.
We're joined now by Dr. Nicole Clavo. This is J.J.'s mother. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I can't even imagine. It's been 5 years since you lost J.J. What have these past few years been like for you?
Ups and downs, of course. You know, it's every day is a new day. You know, we live as mothers who've lost our children. We live 1 second, 1 minute, 1 day at a time. And so every day is a new day.
Oh, God. JJ's killer was convicted as a juvenile instead of an adult. And so that means that he can just walk in a few years. Because of that, is there still justice in your eyes? And is that justice? Because I don't know about that.
I don't believe that as victims we ever receive justice, because nothing will ever bring our child back. For me, would there have been some satisfaction had he been charged as an adult? Sure.
You continue to honor JJ's legacy and so many others by working with the city's Office of Violence Prevention. Tell me why this is so important to you.
Well, after my son was murdered, one, I believe that as victims, as we are called, we have a choice to either be survivors or victims. I chose to be a survivor, and so I made that decision immediately after my son was murdered. I think it's a choice that we have to make, and I think we have to make it for our own survival. And so with that work, I had such an outpouring amount of support from within the city, as well as surrounding cities, statewide, some national support, that I felt I had to be able to provide that support back to families who were experiencing or would experience the trauma that I had experienced.
Unfortunately, this is a question that I've asked before, because I just keep wanting to know how you've managed to not only turn this, I can't even call it a negative, this catastrophic life moment into something where you're working towards positivity. What do you tell yourself every day to make sure that you have you're going to give yourself enough strength to get through just that 24 hours?
Well, we're a happy family. We've always been a happy family, very close-knit. And so I have a daughter who was the oldest sibling. And So oftentimes the siblings get left behind. No one truly asks, how are the siblings doing? They always, are you taking care of your mom? How's your mom doing? But they're never asked, how are they doing? And a lot of times, especially in instances like my daughter, she's 6 years older than my son. And so she was like a second parent. And then I also believe that the murderer took my son. I can't allow him to take me from me and my family while I still have to walk amongst the living. Wow. And so while I still have to put one foot forward every day, it's easy to lay in the bed and, put the covers over my head and never get up. That's easy. It is a job, it's a chore, it's a challenge to get up every morning and push forward. That's a challenge.
Not all heroes wear capes. A lot of them are moms. And I just want to wish you the very best. And I wish I could have met JJ. He sounds like an incredible child. And please say hi to your other children. You have really centered your life around that family, and it's the best thing that can happen to them. You can also listen to a brand new episode, podcast episode about JJ's story. Just search True Crime Chronicles on your favorite podcast player.
Because of the juvenile status, no public record of a release date for Camonte Lindsay is available. But the latest he can get out is sometime in 2023, with the possibility that it could happen anytime before then. I'm Sam Shocker. Thank you for watching DBL's True Crime Chronicles.